For me, North Africa has always been a very mysterious place, and its history is very undervalued considering its impact and influence on the world stage. Outside of Egypt, its kings have largely been overshadowed or flat out ignored in favor of Southern European or Middle Eastern rulers. So today, I wanted to shed some light on these rulers of the desert, if you will, and hopefully spark a debate about the top 10 kings of North Africa. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And as always, you can go on patreon.com to support the Home Team on these videos and animated projects. Also, go to Afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics and resources on African history. All links in the description box below. I wanted to begin with an honorable mention, Ramses the Great. Now this may surprise many of you, especially because some time ago I considered him to be the greatest king in all of Africa. But as I continued studying African history, I simply couldn't continue justifying that. Ramses was no doubt a great king, but there were many African kings who actually did very similar things he did, and under more strenuous circumstances. As my own personal perspective has grown, I want to ensure that I continue sharing that with you guys. Hopefully the kings on this list will justify my new perspective. If not, be sure to discuss in the comments below. Coming in at number 10, we have the Numidian king, Jagira. We all know that ancient Rome, via hindsight, was nothing at all to play with. Some may make the argument that Rome was the greatest empire in human history. Thus, any African who challenged Rome in full, especially finding varying levels of success, must be championed. The only African to halt Roman ambition was actually an African queen named Amanirenas, but that's another story altogether. Jagira was a king of an ancient kingdom called Nubia, located largely in present-day Algeria. He struggled not only to gain the throne, but also to free Nubia from Roman domination, under which his grandfather, Massinissa, had placed it. Jagira was in an impossible position. He was born essentially beholden to arguably the greatest empire in human history. After the death of Massinissa's successor, King Micipsa, in 118 BC, Numidia was divided amongst his heirs, who included Micipsa's two sons and Jagira. Eager to gain power, Jagira soon managed to have one of his rivals, Haimsal, killed. The other, Adherbal, was forced to take refuge in Rome. The Romans then divided Numidia between the remaining two heirs. Mistakenly believing that he had Rome's full support, in 112 BC, Jagira attacked Adherbal, and in the process of achieving victory, massacred a number of Roman citizens. Angered by this attack, the Roman Senate declared war on Jagira. Jagira, however, proved himself an able military leader, using Numidia's desert terrain to avoid major pitched battles and, in general, humiliating the Roman forces. A peace settlement in 111 BC that greatly favored Jagira surprisingly failed to satisfy him, and war was resumed quickly. Once again, Jagira, in all his military prowess, managed to defeat the Romans, effectively ending their control of Numidia by 110 BC. This was a pretty impressive feat. However, Rome could no longer bear Jagira's rebellion, and under Gaius Marius, a new Roman offensive began in 107 BC. Initially, Jagira was able to repeat his early successes against the Romans, but Marius eventually won the support of King Bocchus of Mauritania. Jagira's father-in-law, Bocchus, betrayed the Numidian king, and Jagira was captured by the Romans in 105 BC. Taken to Rome, Jagira was subjected to a series of public humiliations and died there in 104 BC. But he was one of the few North African rulers to significantly challenge Rome in grand fashion. Coming in at number 9, we have Yusuf ibn Tashfin of Morocco, and for this list we'll consider Morocco as part of North Africa. Yusuf was a ruler of the Almoravids from 1061 to 1106. Yusuf is an important figure in North African history because he's the first Northwestern African to extend his borders into Europe. Yusuf was second in command to his cousin Abu Bukhari, but soon won over the hearts of the army and gained power. After gaining this power, he fashioned himself as Amir al-Muslimin, or commander of the Muslims. It's said that in the year, he greatly advanced the city of Marrakesh. Some go as far to say that he was the founder of the great Moroccan city itself. Under Yusuf's leadership, the Almoravids were an unstoppable force. He gained the loyalty of the Saharan men, and this power allowed him to dominate a large territory in northwestern Africa. Over time, other Moorish dynasties were struggling in Spain, and so they invited Yusuf to come and establish Moorish rule. His greatest military achievement was at the Battle of Zaleka, where he took on one of the greatest assembled forces in Christian Europe. He brilliantly defeated the Christians and re-established the authority of Islam in Spain. The battle was reportedly so brutal that soldiers were slipping on the ground due to the blood spilled that day. After this battle, Yusuf seized power for the Almoravids in Spain, and his power grew greatly. Next, at number 8, we also have a Moroccan sultan, Moulay Ismail ibn Sharif. Moulay Ismail was the second sultan of the Alawite dynasty of Morocco. After the death of his half-brother, he seized control of the treasury storehouse known as a Makhzan and had himself declared sultan in April of that same year. Ismail's rule was constantly disputed up until 1677 by his brother, his nephew, and another Moroccan leader. What makes Moulay so great is his political and military prowess, which enabled him to greatly extend his rule. All his rivals had the support of the Ottoman Turks. By 1673, however, Moulay defeated the other Moroccan leader and his forces, and in the years that followed, both Ismail's brother and nephew were brought into the administration as his regional governors. Despite his ability to unify Morocco, Moulay was somewhat haunted by his half-brother's actions who ruled before him. The previous sultan pitted the Arabs and the Amazigh or Berbers against each other, and thus many Amazigh weren't necessarily loyal to the Alawite dynasty. To counteract this threat and the threat of the Ottomans, Moulay secured a unique army called the Abids. They were the largest army of black soldiers ever mustered in Morocco, and they were no doubt the backbone of Morocco's power at the time. Moulay's mother herself was an enslaved black woman, perhaps from Mali or Senegal, so it's not at all surprising that he would make use of such a force to solidify his power. The Abids were said to have numbered over 150 soldiers at full strength and were given intense specialized training. This army allowed Moulay to effectively defeat the Ottoman forces in 679, 682, and 695 through 96, absolutely securing Moroccan independence from Ottoman rule. He recaptured Tangier from the British, Arzila from the Portuguese, and both Al-Mahdiya and Larache from the Spanish. Ironically, his defeat of European forces did not stop his foreign relations with them because he knew he still needed trading partners, and so he forged a very strong bond with France, which gave him the access he desired. For number 7, we have King Menes of ancient Egypt. King Menes, or Narmer Menes, was an ancient Egyptian king who was thought to have ruled in 3050 BC and, according to Egyptian accounts, was responsible for uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. He's also attributed with establishing the city of Memphis, which served as his capital. According to the 3rd century BC historian Manetho, Menes ruled for 62 years and originally came from Thinis, a province in Upper Egypt. Eventually, between 3200 and 3000 BC, Heraclius emerged as the dominant kingdom in the region, as Egypt had not been unified yet. One of the prime pieces of evidence for this is a stone tablet called the Narmer Palette. The palette's depiction of the famous warrior King Menes as wearing both the red crown of Lower Egypt and the white crown of Upper Egypt is generally interpreted as a symbol of Egypt's unification into a single nation. Besides King Menes' name, the tablet contains details of the many military victories he won while consolidating his power. The unification of Egypt by Menes established one of the earliest forms of centralized government in Africa. Because of Menes, Egypt entered a period of rapid development that included the regulation of trade links and the construction of palaces, large tombs, and religious temples. In addition, greater emphasis was placed on creating methods of irrigation to produce the abundant crops needed to sustain Egypt's growing population. Egypt was arguably the greatest human civilization on the planet, and certainly the most influential. Without King Menes, Western civilization would perhaps look a little different. At number 6, we have the mighty Hannibal Barca of Carthage. Even though Hannibal was technically a general, the Barca family no doubt established their rule over Carthage, as they essentially paid off the Carthaginian Senate. Hannibal's father, Hamilcar, was in charge of all the Carthaginian forces on land and at sea. He wanted to make Carthage ready because he knew Rome had its own ambition to gain total dominion and could not be trusted. Hamilcar fought in the latter end of the First Punic War and absolutely despised Rome, and his hatred for Rome apparently passed down to his son, Hannibal. In fact, legend has it that Hannibal promised his father that he would always consider Rome his chief enemy. At the age of 25, Hannibal Barca took control of the army. By 228 BC, a Roman frontier started to expand into Spain, and Hannibal began to campaign there in order to ensure Carthaginian control. Hannibal took city after city as he militarily drove through. The wealth he acquired was used to purchase the supplies and troops needed to continue his trek. Hannibal led a daring march over the Alps from Spain to Italy. This feat is considered one of the greatest in military history. Roman generals were consistently outmaneuvered by Hannibal. They even sought to avoid direct battle with him at one point. After the Carthaginians finally lost in the Second Punic War, some scholars say that Hannibal decided to take poison before ever surrendering in full to the Romans. Not only did Hannibal win the respect of his enemy, but he won the respect of his troops by living the same hard life they did, eating the same foods, and even sleeping on the ground. His triumphant feats in battle against arguably the paramount military force on the planet made him the greatest military strategist in human history, according to some scholars. Some of his tactics survived into the modern era, which is absolutely remarkable. Breaking our top 5, we have King Taharqa of ancient Nubia. Taharqa was a Nubian king of the ancient Kushite Empire that ruled Egypt. He was one of the most popular kings in the ancient world, and was even mentioned in Hebrew accounts. Before ascending the throne, at a young age, Taharqa was summoned by his uncle Shabiku to provide support and wage war in the north. Taharqa's reign is commonly divided into 2 periods. His first decade is regarded as a peaceful one, blessed with intensive commerce or other sort of contact with the Phoenician coast, while the second period was characterized by conflict with Assyria. Now this is where some may be critical of Taharqa in his second reign, but via hindsight, we now know that the Assyrians were one of the greatest military powers on the planet at the time, and his stalemate with them can be seen as an accomplishment, especially considering how the Assyrians were known to run through everyone. The Assyrians were able to take northern Egypt from Taharqa, but were defeated by Taharqa's forces in southern Egypt near Thebes, and thus could not take all of Egypt. The Assyrians were subject to the north, and the Kushites under Taharqa continued to reign in Thebes from the south. Ironically, Assyrian rule over northern Egypt at times was ignored, and the priests in the north acknowledged Taharqa as the legitimate ruler of Memphis and the Delta. Taharqa's ability to quell the all-powerful Assyrians, keeping them at bay and away from Kush, was quite impressive at the time. Moreover, what further solidifies Taharqa's place in the all-time top kings of North Africa is his building projects. He restored existing temples, built new ones, and built the largest pyramid in the Napatan region. His first decade of rule allowed the whole region to flourish and contributed to the so-called African Renaissance of the Nile Valley. Coming in at number 4, we have King Pi, also from ancient Nubia. King Pi was the greatest Kushite king who founded the Kushite Empire, establishing the 25th dynasty of Egypt. Egypt during this time, from the Kushite perspective, was corrupted culturally and religiously. Egyptian authority over time was withering away. Deep rivalries in Egypt between the various cities brought about social, political, and religious fragmentation. There was a lot of domestic unrest in the country, and the 25th dynasty under King Pi brought cultural, religious, and civil stability back into the region, in what has been coined the African Renaissance. King Pi certainly ushered in one of the greatest moments in Nile Valley history and rejuvenated African civilization, an event that undoubtedly benefited the world. It's generally believed that the Kushite conquest of Egypt was completed by around 750 BC. In the course of this invasion, King Pi quelled growing rebellions initiated in northern Egypt, On a monumental stone stela, King Pi left engraved details of both his life as a king and his many battles. The Stela of Victory, or Victory Stela as it's known, contains a long description of Pi's military achievements. His armies fought the enemy at land and on water, and his victory was not only swift but filled with honorable and merciful deeds. He forgave his enemies and even treated the defeated kings with generosity by appointing them governors of their lands. Breaking our top 3, we have Pharaoh Thutmose III of ancient Egypt. Thutmose III was a great military leader of the ancient Egyptian 18th dynasty. During the reign of Hatshepsut, Thutmose apparently spent his time in the army, which served him well. As soon as he became pharaoh in his own right, Thutmose III was faced with a Mitanni revolt in Asia Minor. The struggle with Mitanni, one of Egypt's greatest enemies, continued throughout Thutmose III's reign. He's reported to have engaged in 17 campaigns before he eventually conquered various regions. It was these military expeditions, more than any others he conducted, that established his reputation as a great general. Thutmose had created the largest empire Egypt had ever seen. He conquered from northern Syria all the way to the Fourth Cataract in Nubia. He was as enthusiastic about erecting buildings as much as he was about waging war, and that excellent balance is what made him one of the greats. In the last years of his reign, during a period of peace and prosperity for Egypt, he built and transformed many fantastic monuments. One of the most important of these was the Temple of Karnak at Thebes, dedicated to the god Amun. Coming in at number 2, we have Yusuf Yaqub al-Manzur of Morocco. Al-Manzur was a ruler of the Almohads from 1184 to 1199. He makes our list because he reportedly never lost a battle, as he single-handedly halted the Christian Reconquista. His military prowess was second to none. Interestingly enough, like Moulay Ismail of Morocco, Yaqub's mother was also said to have been an enslaved black woman from further south, perhaps from Mali. At the age of 24, Al-Manzur succeeded his popular father, Abu Yaqub Yusuf, who was reportedly killed in Portugal in 1184. Since that time, Al-Manzur swore revenge on the Iberian Peninsula. After quelling many internal difficulties in Africa, Al-Manzur inflicted heavy defeats on the Christians of the Iberian Peninsula, taking thousands of Christians back to North Africa as slaves. Upon his return to Africa, Christian forces yet again went on the offensive, and he returned to stem the tide, absolutely destroying the European forces in total victory. After the famous Battle of Alarcos, Yaqub was known to the Almohads as Al-Manzur, which means one made victorious by God. With renewed confidence, Al-Manzur made his way through southern parts of the Iberian Peninsula, conquering Toledo, Madrid, Alcala, and more. Al-Manzur is remembered for his stellar military leadership and for bringing glory to the Almohad Empire. His reign saw the booming of architecture, trade, science, and philosophy. He was a principal of many things and even wrote a religious book. Al-Manzur was no doubt one of the most powerful Moorish leaders in all of African history, and his legacy is recounted even to this day. And finally, coming in at number 1, the greatest king in North African history is Pharaoh Olmos of Egypt. Pharaoh Olmos is considered by many to be the first king of the New Kingdom, establishing Egypt's most popular dynasty. One cannot stress enough the impossible conditions young Olmos was put under as he faced off with the very first invasion of the African continent. The Hyksos were a new enemy to Africa with superior technology and innovation, the war chariot being introduced to Egypt through warfare with them. The young Olmos had to deal with how the first invasion of the continent affected his family, killing his father. Olmos's brother Kamos not only had to deal with invading Hyksos in the north, but with Kushites in the south, who were apparently seasonally allied with the Hyksos. The north and the south were against the royal family. After the death of his brother, Pharaoh Olmos comes to the throne and begins the 18th dynasty of Egypt, considered by many to be the most flourishing dynasty in Egyptian history. Olmos finally defeated the Hyksos, avenging his father's death and restoring Egypt back to its glory, completely driving them out. Olmos advanced Theban rule over all of Egypt and successfully reasserted Egyptian power in its former vassal territories of Nubia and Canaan. Essentially, Olmos administered justice in full. The last years of his reign were devoted to reorganizing Egypt's system of government, and his building program culminated in the construction of the last pyramid built by native Egyptian rulers. It would seem as though Olmos learned from the Hyksos invasion and continued to use their technology for the betterment of Egypt, which is certainly a sign of a great leader. Given the grave disadvantage he was born into and his rise to the top, creating the best dynasty in Egyptian history, I consider Olmos to be the greatest king in North African history. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos, you can support in this production on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.